1 week ago, I started learning Claw to see how easy it is to improve on and see if it's any better than other options like paddles, which is the main way I've played Fortnite for the past 5 years. I spent 7 days and nearly 40 hours practicing Claw just for this video, so if you enjoy it, please make sure to subscribe. And now here's the 1 week Claw progression. Day 1 began, and just in the first few minutes, I was surprised with how easy editing felt. The hand placement was confusing and very uncomfortable at this point, but that didn't stop me from popping out some side jumps and decent edits just 5 minutes in. Now I know this looks suspicious to some of you, and I completely understand that a free build like this just 20 minutes into switching all vines and learning Claw seems unreasonable. But please understand that if you already know Fortnite, when you switch to a new input or new vines, you're not actually relearning the game. You're just changing the buttons you press and the way you press the button. You still have all of your Fortnite knowledge, and you can see here by the end of hour 1 on Claw, I could already do some decent free builds. But I knew I wouldn't hold up in a fight just yet, so I went into this Peace Control map by Raider for 3 entire hours. This map helped me reinforce some muscle memory, and it's probably the fastest progress I saw throughout the entire week. But even with 4 hours of Claw experience under my belt and some decent looking mechanics, real fights are an entirely different thing, and that was pretty obvious when I turned into an absolute bot during my first few fights. This part of learning is pretty much unavoidable. You'll always panic and click the wrong buttons under pressure, but with enough of these situations, you'll start to settle in, and that's when I started putting up some actually decent fights. Now, so far, this has all just been from day 1, because I spent a lot of time trying to get comfortable on this grip and become somewhat familiar with these new vines. By this point, I was nearly 8 hours in, but you can see I was still making mistakes. In fact, my first solos game I tried ended like this, when I didn't shoot my shotgun and then panicked and switched to the wrong item slot. You still remember all those hours I spent getting decent mechanics? Well, when you're faced with even more pressure than creative, stuff like this happens. But I went on, and I actually even started to get some decent eliminations in real games. By this point, I had become somewhat comfortable with the Claw grip, and the only reason is because I was getting familiar with Spider Claw, which is when you click your triggers with your ring fingers and bumpers with your middle finger. This is exactly how pros like Miro and G-Money play, but I'll be the first to say that it's strange to get used to. It definitely made my aim worse, but it relieved so much pressure from my wrist, and it's actually more optimal because you can click each button much faster. Learning this trigger layout was definitely the hardest part about this setup, but despite that, just 9 hours in at the end of day 1, I got a solos win, which I was tiredly happy about. Let's go, chat. Day 2 on Claw was pretty much all about 1v1s. Now, 1v1s are hands down my favorite way to improve, because if you can find a player that's a similar skill level to you, the fights get intense and it helps you improve at nearly every aspect of the game. You get to practice your builds, edits, aim, and I was definitely seeing some solid progress during these fights. The big thing I noticed on day 2 wasn't necessarily speed, but more so consistency with both my edits and my aim. I wasn't choking as many shots, and everything felt super fluid. I even ended with some box fights, with the goal being to learn my resets, because that's the biggest struggle I had early on. I was having major issues resetting builds, but right here I actually did it successfully and actually was decent in this round. Now, day 2 I spent about 4 hours practicing, with nearly all of that being in 1v1 build fights, so when day 3 came, I was feeling great. Day 3 I started off hot with some really solid free builds where you can definitely see the speed picking up, and you might notice something different about my setup because I actually switched my controllers. My main controller has these digital tap face buttons that are great, but I found that the buttons on this controller that aren't clicky were much easier to press on Claw grip. And with this switch, I actually saw almost instant improvement, specifically around my consistency, because the buttons were now easier to press. I mean, I was doing triple edits into side edits, side jumps into quad edits down into triple edits back up, and this was basically a combination of the consistency from day 2 mixed in with the newfound speed of day 3. I felt pretty good about my builds and edits, but even here on day 3, I just couldn't get my resets to be clean. If you haven't noticed my vines yet, they're actually copied from Miro, and what he does is have a touchpad edit, an R1 select, R2 confirm, and in an L1 reset. So every time I select these squares for the edit, I'm actually using the right bumper to do that instead of the right trigger. And then I'm resetting builds with the left bumper. They're definitely interesting binds, especially when paired with the spider claw grip, but there were highlights in nearly every fight as I slowly started to improve my resets, and then conveniently I found myself back in 1v1 build fights again. These things are just so fun to me, and the fact that they're actually great for improvement meant I spent a good amount of time in them again throughout day 3, which led to undoubtedly my best clips on Claw yet. On day 1, I spent multiple hours just trying to get one simple clip without messing up, but 2 days later I'm here with clip after clip, and this is probably the day I officially felt like a decent Claw player. With an additional 4.5 hours of practice, I didn't feel like a good player by any means, but pretty decent, and on day 4, I pretty much didn't skip a beat. Day 4 on Claw started off with even more 1v1s, but 1v1s absolutely full of piece control. So there's kind of a trend going on so far, where each day I'm getting noticeably better at something. Day 1 was just learning the basics, day 2 I found the consistency, day 3 I found the speed, and now on day 4 I was really finding the smart plays and piece control. I was feeling good and even trolling a little bit with the new Michael Myers set, which says something in itself. Feeling skilled enough to troll like this is what led me to playing my first real pub games since day 1, and while they didn't go terrible, I wouldn't say they went well either. I would have liked to make some better plays that reflected what I was doing in creative, but again, creative and real games are just so different, so I took what I could get and prepared myself for day 5, where I actually played a tournament on Claw. The tournament was the Console Champions Cup, which meant I had to play on my PS5, and wow, I actually felt like I was the worst player ever for a few hours. If you've never attempted to make a drastic change like switching to Claw or completely revamping your binds, I'll tell you that while it's likely worth it in the long run, it sucks to be bad at the game. Not even that I was terrible, but when you're used to a certain skill level for so long and being able to beat certain players, switching to something where you're not at that skill level yet is really tough. And on day 5, especially being on console, I was feeling that. I nearly wanted to make the switch back to my paddle setup, but I stuck it out and even had a few highlights in this console cup. Despite some of the mistakes, we did qualify to the second round of the tournament, which is how I started off day 6. Again on day 6 in the Console Champions Cup, I had some highlights, specifically with my aim, but ultimately we did fall short in the second round, and after playing nearly 8 hours of Claw on console, I was so ready to get back to my PC gameplay. For whatever reason, the first thing I ended up in was box fights, which I was actually hitting some really nice shots in. Now once again, I returned to real pub games here on day 6 to hopefully see some improvement over day 4 pubs, and I would say that happened. Almost instantly, I had these absolute sweat snipe me and W key me, but I made a couple of good edits under pressure and managed to make some distance. This guy obviously continued to W key me and got beamed out of the air. Now this may not look like anything too crazy, but what it signaled to me is that my aim was improving on this spider claw layout. I was struggling with AR aim for a few days because I'm now taking my trigger with a new finger, but just like with everything else, we're seeing some solid improvement. Now I of course didn't win a game on day 6 because my lobbies are full of sweat, but I went into 1v1s and had without a doubt my best fights on Claw yet. I was feeling confident and fast with all of my edits, and especially with my aim, where I was hitting some pretty solid shots. I mean, this play here I couldn't even imagine doing on Claw on day 1. Just the act of side jumping, looking for a shot, and getting a floor down all at the same time that leads into a smart piece control play with a max pump shot. That was super cool to see, and then this clip to round out day 6 looks almost identical to a play I'd make on paddles that I've been using for years. And with that, day 7 began. Final day for this week-long progression, and the main goal here on day 7 was to get some quality eliminations and actually have a solid win, which honestly after 34 hours of practice over the previous 6 days shouldn't be too difficult, and thankfully that was true. In my first game of the day, I was playing pretty well. Elim after Elim, I was doing solid, and what was very apparent here on day 7 was how much my aim had improved. Between my shotgun accuracy and beaming players with an AR, these were all things I could not not do within the first couple of days. But finally here, after a couple hours of games, I made it to endgame, and with the help of this incredibly annoying gun, got my 14 elim win, which is the final time I'll play Claw for the time being. I do believe that Claw is the most optimal way to play Fortnite, and I even recommend it to players that don't use paddles or Claw yet. Specifically, I'd recommend Spider Claw, but even 7 days and about 40 hours in, I believe I still prefer the feel of paddles and my skill level on them. So I'll be attempting to switch back to paddles, but that honestly might not work. After over 40 hours, the possibility of staying on double Claw is definitely there, and it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. Make sure to click that subscribe button if you enjoyed, and thank you so much for watching.